Hey everyone, just wanted to kind of sit down and ramble on a little bit about Silent Hill 2, the remake, and I guess also the original as to kind of compare it between the two. I played through both. I started with the remake and then I went to play the original to kind of grasp and see the difference between the two. I have to say that I personally really enjoyed both. The remake really expands upon the original in like a very meaningful way in my opinion. Some argue that there is some like differences in like voice acting and that sort of stuff. I think that's one of the first things I want to touch upon. From my perspective, as someone who doesn't have like a bias towards the original, I suppose, I felt that the voice acting was better in the remake, primarily because when I played the original, a lot of us was very robotic and like really just reading off a script, where I feel that especially with the main character James, it was just a lot more emotion, right? And even with Maria, which is probably the biggest pain point for a lot of folks, at least in my chat when I was playing it, to me felt like a bit more sass going on, right? And I personally really enjoyed that. I think that overall, again, just voice acting was done well, was a lot better. Some folks have also had some, gripes about like the soundtrack and stuff like that. Sometimes I did feel that it felt a little bit out of place, but that's okay. When it comes to gameplay though, I think that after having played the original after the remake, it was very interesting to see how much more gameplay there was in the remake. The remake is a lot more focused on you actually taking out the monsters that are within there, and sometimes they are a little tanky, especially those nurses, because quite a few bullets, but once you figured out that, a couple of bullets and some hits with your melee weapon will do the trick, it's generally pretty fine. You could try to ignore them, but most of the time I kind of felt like, given how many enemies there were sometimes and in what positions they were in and how easily they could attack you, I tended to kind of opt for just taking them out, especially with enough ammo being around, so I just kind of went ahead and did that. To compare that to the original, where you basically could ignore every single enemy unless you were like, I'll shoot a few, and sometimes it was just a bit more convenient to take them out given the fact that the small corridors would get you trapped within them. As for the expanding of the gameplay, especially the puzzles, it was very interesting to see what the original did compared to the remake. The remake really wants you to go and find every single piece of the puzzle. I think a very big one is probably in the apartment section, spoiler alert here, where to, I guess, how am I going to put this without trying to spoil everything? Let's just say that the puzzle in the apartments was expanded upon in a very large way. And I think to kind of give you a comparison, there is a scene in a mirror room, to try to avoid spoilers here, that took me 5 hours to get to in the remake, but in the original it took me about an hour, hour and a half. To kind of give you the difference of like how much larger the remake actually is. Some might argue, and I've heard particularly by Akari in my Twitch chat, like give the argument of bloat. I personally never really felt that the remake really tried to extend it for the sake of extending. Every single thing that they extended upon made sense. And with not trying to spoil anything here, because I'm sure that there's some folks who might be watching this who are just purely interested in seeing like, okay, so how good is the game itself? How does it compare to the original? And does it expand in a meaningful way? The answer to that is yes, it's a great game. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It is definitely in my top 3 best games of the year. I'd even like have some like, edging towards number 1, with Black Myth being like very close behind it. Haven't finished Black Myth yet because, stream didn't seem to really enjoy it too much. So I just kind of left it, and maybe at some point I'll play it again, but that's okay. Regardless, very, very solid experience. I would go into more depth and details and give you more and more examples of the gameplay. But unfortunately, if I were to go and do that, it would veer too much into spoiler territory. But I guess the easiest way to sum it up would really be by telling you that if you think about the original, just think about how every single step that they used to do in the original got expanded upon in what, in my view, was a meaningful and logical way of expanding upon what the original already did. After I played the remake and then went to the original, I often felt like, wait, was that it? Because obviously in the remake, they basically slapped at the very least probably like another hour of gameplay. It took me about 14-15 hours to get to the remake, and the original took me about 5 or 6. to kind of give you a idea of like how big the difference is and how much more gameplay they added to the game. A lot of stuff with like the changes that they made, I thought was meaningful changes. Some of the boss fights, or well, I guess every single one of the boss fights, in my opinion, were made a lot better, a lot more intense, a lot more interesting. Just again, just everything that they did with the game, I think was just a perfect way. Well, I'm going to say perfect, because I don't like to use that word generally with the games, but they did a great job at basically enhancing and expanding on everything. The vibe of the game, I guess it comes down to personal taste. I think the reason why some might still prefer the original in terms of vibe, primarily is because the game looks like a lot more dated, and I guess with that dated, and like I guess with those assets and stuff like that, where they try to make it a bit more creepy and stuff, it probably goes a long way. But on the flip side, in a remake, some of the lighting and the fog and the way that they set up the environments and the overall feel and vibe of the game, I think I might have a bit of a bias towards. But that might also be with the fact that I personally just enjoy, I guess, a more realistic look of stuff. And when it looks like PlayStation 2 games, it looks a little bit more like a video game, if that makes sense. Especially when it's like 2001 graphics. And don't get me wrong, Silent Hill 2, I played the enhanced version on PC, still looks very good for how old it is. When it comes to those more like lighting and like the Unreal Engine 5 really shining and stuff like that, especially during certain sections where, you know, the fog and some of the red lights and everything like that, and the environment and the details and, well, I guess the everything really, it's a very different experience than the original, but I think a very cool experience. And again, I think they really nailed the vibe of the game. In terms of performance, I heard people complain about it here and there. Personally, I might have had a few stutters here and there, but generally speaking, I had an overall smooth experience. I've heard mixed bags about that, so if you really care about performance, but then I guess keep that in consideration. But it's Unreal Engine 5, which generally has some performance hiccups here and there, and hopefully they'll fix it on an engine level at some point in the near future. But for now, those are just some of my thoughts about the Silent Hill 2 remake. Let me know yours in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, leave a like, subscribe, and bye!